Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. In American literature in the past 2 centuries, there have been two sharks that have scared seas of readers from page one through the end. Peter Benchley's Jaws and Steve Alten's The Meg. Many millennial viewers know Steve's work from the blockbuster adaptation of his film starring Jason Statham, and many around the world have shared a scare or two as they've read millions and millions of copies of Steve's books. We're so excited to have him here tonight to talk about The Loch, Goliath, and all of his other hit works. Steve, thanks for being with us. You're one of the great masters of scaring the heck out of readers while still inspiring them to want to dive deeper and deeper into troubled waters on the page. When do you remember first becoming fascinated by sharks yourself as a kid?
It started when I was about 15 years old and Jaws came out as a paperback. And I read the book, loved it, and wanted to read more about great white shark attacks. So basically went to the library, took out every book on real shark attacks, and there was always a little blurb about Carcharodon megalodon, the prehistoric cousin of the great white, and usually accompanied by a black and white photo taken in the Smithsonian of six scientists sitting in a big jaw.
Once you had the concept for The Meg, what first gave you the idea for the super frightening subtitle, A Novel of Deep Terror?
Well, we never called it The Meg. We called it Meg, A Novel of Deep Terror, because nobody knew what Megs were. In fact, one of the big fights I had was with the publisher when they put out the paperback, because they just put the word Meg on the front cover in black. I said, no one's going to know what this is. And this is the publisher that published Jaws. We all remember what that front cover looked like. So it was like they didn't want to sell books. I don't know.
As an author, how do you get inside the mind of a shark to write from its point of view on the page?
I'm not sure a shark realizes it's underwater. But it does react with evolutionary skills toward the things in front of it, whether it's hunting prey or determining what else is out there. So I try to introduce the senses of what a megalodon would have, a sensory array, and then put it to use while I write the passages.
What was your research like physically in the course of writing this book? For instance, did you do any deep sea diving to simulate the environment you were writing about, consult shark hunters?
In August of '95, I got in the mail a Time magazine, and on the front cover was an anglerfish. And the article talked about hydrothermal vents and how prior to 1977, we didn't even think scientists didn't believe there was life at the bottom of the ocean because there was no sun, because there was no photosynthesis. And then lo and behold, in 1977, they invent the Alten submersible. They go down the bottom of the ocean, and guess what's waiting for them? A whole different chain of life, which is photosynthesis. Instead of photosynthesis, chemosynthesis, using chemicals coming out of the water. So that when I read that article, I thought, and they also talked about the Mariana Trench being the deepest part of the Western Pacific, the deepest part of the ocean, 7 miles down, 1,550 miles long, 40 miles wide, totally unexplored. And I thought, what was the name of that shark, that big shark with the jaws in the Smithsonian that I read about when I was younger? So I went to the library and did some research on it. There wasn't a whole lot out there. But I came out of there believing that I would write this book. So I set the goal to write the book. There was no internet back then for a while, so I did most of the research in libraries. The original manuscript, I sent it a 2-page query letter to every agent who handled fiction, which was about 60 or 70 agents back then. And only one was interested, Ken Atchley out of Los Angeles. He believed it would make a great book and movie, but he said it needed a lot of editing. So we edited the book together and took it out to the big publishing houses after we'd already gotten a preliminary deal, a first look deal with Disney's Hollywood Pictures. So we actually had the movie sold before we had the book sold.
Wow, that's a reversal from the way it usually works. I don't think viewers and readers in general know necessarily how long it takes from a book when it gets optioned to the years that can pass before cameras start rolling. What was that journey like with The Meg to getting to the silver screen?
Well, like I mentioned, we got the first movie option in the spring of '96. No, I'm sorry. The spring of '96, before the book was even optioned. And they went through 2 screenwriters, horrible scripts. And then the head of the studio was fired. So when you lose the head of a studio, that means if your project was optioned by him, it's going back into reversion. So the rights reverted back to me, and nothing happened for about 5 or 6 years. I spoke to a friend of mine, Nick Nunziata, who is the founder of Chud.com, Cinematic Happenings Under Development. And when he found out that I had the rights back, he went to two of his friends, Guillermo del Toro, the director of Hellboy, and the producer, Lloyd Levin. And they decided that, yeah, we'll option it for $1, write the script, and they assigned a director to me, to the project, Jan de Bont, who had done Twister, who was a great director. And we worked on the script together, and that went out to New Line Cinema, which optioned the package and promptly replaced me as screenwriter. And the new screenwriter had his own take upon Meg, saw it more like Moby Dick with a big shark, and that just didn't work. So the rights were reverted back to me 2 years later because they had they'd undersold the foreign rights, so they couldn't get financing. So the weddings, and I'm left at the altar twice. So I went to a new friend of mine, Belle Avery, who was a producer whose forte was raising money. And I sold the option to her, and she spent the next 8 years independently raising the money, and eventually brought the whole package to Warner Brothers for distribution, but they wanted a piece of the action. They wanted to be part of it. And I'm glad they did, because they did a great job. And so 22 years later, I think it was, the movie came out.
Along the same lines, once filming wrapped, it must have been surreal for you to see the Meg up on the IMAX.
It was a little surreal, on the parts that I felt they really did a great job writing a copy of the book from. That was the most exciting parts. I thought they did a great job with the Mariana Trench.
Every author that I've spoken to for the show has talked about the dreaded sophomore slump, the following up their first book with a second. Did you already have the idea for the trench in your back pocket before you began working on the Meg?
I'd always intended it to be a second book. I just didn't think I'd be doing it as my second published book. The 2-book deal that we got with Doubleday was for Meg and Mayan Calendar Doomsday Prophecy, which later came out as Domain. But they didn't want a Mayan Prophecy book. They wanted another underwater book. So my editor kept sort of strong-arming me toward writing what they wanted, but there was a lot of money at stake, so I basically gave them what they wanted. It wasn't a very good book. And so 2 weeks before I was supposed to be paid a lot of money, they canceled. And, kind of floored us. They didn't tell us why. We found out later it had a combination of a couple of things, including they were being taken over by a big German company called Bertelsmann. So instead of the Domain book that would eventually be about the Mayan calendar coming out, we had to sue them to get the rights back to the Mayan book, while I wrote the sequel to Meg, which was a trench. And then we later got the rights back, and then I rewrote the entire book as Domain.
By the time you get 10 years into the series with Origins, what had you done with books like Primal Waters, Hell's Aquarium, Night Stalkers, and Generations to keep it fresh for yourself and then by extension the fans?
To be honest, with the Meg series, I didn't really look at it as I didn't know it was going to be that long of a series. I knew there would be a sequel because I had given, Meg had given birth to a pup. 3 of them actually, and 1 survived. Primal Waters was written, I think, 5 or 6 years after Meg. And then there was a big gap between Hell's Aquarium. I think Hell's Aquarium is the thing that saved the series because it introduced a new element that allowed me to open up the door to a whole lot of other prehistoric sea creatures. And that really made it interesting. So everything sort of had taken on a second life at that point. Night Stalkers was the 5th book, Generations the 6th book. After a while, you've written about every shark attack scene that you could possibly think of. Yeah. So you try to come up with something new, a different character, a different shark. In Generations ended with the introduction of a really cool shark, which I named the Queen of the Panthalassa Sea, which is a huge female megalodon with, instead of being albino, she's entirely black, melting into the hidden sea a lot better. And the 7th book will end with her and the seventh book will be the end of the series, which is Make Purgatory, which I started writing a little bit, but I will get into more after I finish the book I'm working on now.
A lot of authors have tried their hand at scaring readers on the page with their own spin on the legendary Loch Ness Monster of Scotland series. For you with Loch, what first made you want to take your shot at it? And that actually wound up turning into another New York Times best-selling series with the Loch Vostok and the Loch Heaven's Lake that followed.
To be honest, I turned it down. It was first presented to me by my agent, Ken Atchity. He said, you should write a Loch Ness book. And my initial response was, it's kind of hokey. You know, it's like writing Bigfoot or the Abominable Snowman. And but then I started doing the research, and I realized there's a business that surrounds this entire venture on the legend, which the Scottish people in the Highlands are perpetrating as you know, it's a tourist industry, which is great for them. But the fact that in order to make this tourist industry make sense to others, they claim it was a plesiosaur, which it can't be. Plesiosaurs were marine reptiles. They disappeared 65 million years ago. The Loch isn't that old. Loch Ness isn't that old. So once I separated the myth from the science, and I spoke to a friend of mine who was who had been to Loch Ness and had his own theories, then I realized that he was onto something, and that there was some real science. There really was something in there, and if I could justify it from a scientific basis, then it would make for a great book. Because then I could put the science against the legend, and clarify that, separate the two through the hero, who's a marine biologist who grew up there and had his own experience with this creature.
With the Domain trilogy, which consists of Domain, Resurrection, and Phobos Mayan Fear, is one of your most popular. Did you set out with this in mind to be a trilogy, or did you envision them as standalone titles initially?
No, I don't think I'm an expert in trilogies, but I was not thinking trilogy. I was just thinking one book. But when it came time to end the story, I realized that this story doesn't end this way. It would end on a cliffhanger. And so there was going to be a second book. Whether there was going to be a third one was going to depend upon where the second took me. But in retrospect, I love the places where it took me. The story of the third book, had I known about those things going on in this huge piece of equipment located in France that is actually replicating the Big Bang and creating these little stranglets, which are basically miniature black holes, I would have used that as the first story. But I had already the first two books written. This new thesis, this new piece of equipment to me allowed me to go back in time and do the whole thing over again.
Yeah.
And put it into, bring the story full cycle.
Though this is an especially hot topic right now, years ago you traveled with readers on the page and Undisclosed into the world of UFOs. What first inspired you to want to brave into that new topical territory?
Well, that's a whole story into itself, because I was actually, what started that off was I was finishing up Phobos Mind Fear, which is the third in the Domain series, and there's definitely a part of this story that involves extraterrestrials and UFOs. And in doing my research, I came across this 2-hour special hosted by Dr. Stephen Greer, who's the foremost authority on extraterrestrials and UFOs. He had brought together eyewitnesses from the military, intelligence services, NASA, all sorts of branches of government, who testified that these things were real. And I contacted him by email, and I asked permission to use some of his guests' quotes as part in between chapters. And he said, no problem. And when the book was done, I sent him a copy of the book. I asked Dr. Greer's permission to use excerpts between the chapters. He said, no problem. When the book was done, I sent him a copy of it. His wife read it and she really loved it. And then she emailed me and said that Dr. Greer wants to meet you.
Huh.
And in 6 months, we're going to be in Miami. Can we arrange a dinner? You know, I was honored. I said, absolutely. And 3 nights actually before we were supposed to get together, my wife and I are driving home on a Saturday night from seeing a movie. We're going through our neighborhood at about 11 o'clock at night. And off in the distance, I see these lights coming in staggered pairs. This amazing yellow-orange light. I guess there were 8 to 12 of them. Like I said, in staggered pairs, flying quietly about, 500 to 1,000 feet off the ground. Maybe more, I couldn't tell. But my wife and I stopped the car and got out and started looking at them. And we couldn't believe what we're looking at. Then these saucer-shaped things flying over us. It wasn't scary. It was like it was breathtaking. It was obviously from a civilization far advanced than ours. And as we watched them, they flew off into the distance and disappeared. But not just in distance-wise. They simply moved into a higher dimension. We saw them sort of just, I don't know how else to say it, just move into a higher dimension. And we'd never seen anything like that, have never seen anything like that since. And then 3 nights later, we had dinner with the Greers. And of course, the first thing out of our mouths is, you'll never guess what we saw. And he said, this happens to me a lot because he meditates and communicates with them. And he said, for new people, for people I've never met before, they're sort of checking you out, which is kind of a freaky thing. But we became good friends, and his goal was to get his work brought into the mainstream media because he was kind of segregated off by the subject matter into not being believed. But he had actually briefed several presidents, members of the cabinet, senators, military officials. So, I mean, this guy has an entire history with these things. So when it came to writing my book and helping him with his book, he allowed me access to unbelievable stuff. I mean, scary stuff. This stuff is going on and we have no concept of it. And this all started, I mean, I don't want to go through the whole history on one book, but it's real. I mean, you know, and the solutions to our energy problems, we have the solutions. They're just being kept from us. They've been black shelved.
You shifted from natural danger in the form of sharks in the water to man-made danger in the form of an AI submarine in Goliath. That was a bit of a different direction for you. When did that idea originally pop onto your radar?
Goliath also started as an idea that my manager, Kanachidi, had with another writer of his that was had not been published, but had created a concept that was similar. And I read his concept and I didn't like it, but I came up with some avenues that I did like that I would write for my own version of the book. So Goliath was sort of like a Frankenstein story, and where the ship itself is the internal workings of the sub are the computer, I should say, are AI and become its own character. And it's learning from its crew, which is on their own mission of destruction.
You then dove headlong into the sci-fi world with the Omega Project. Do you enjoy traveling to new creative territory and frontiers from book to book like that?
The Omega Project started out as a sequel to Goliath.
Okay.
And the story was I pitched it to my editor, and he said, you got to write this as a standalone. Don't, start your own series with this one. Don't use it as a sequel. So that rearranged a few things, but yeah, that's a pretty compelling story. It's not real long, but the writing is pretty dense in it, very descriptive. And so it's one of my favorites. And I just love the fact that, in the log line, you're basically describing a guy who's a scientist who goes in for a 30-day cryogenic experiment and wakes up 12 million years later.
You've highlighted Grim Reaper Ended Days as one of your most personal favorite books from your catalog. Would you share a bit with viewers about why it ranks that high on the list?
I think it's the most layered book I've ever written. Every time I go back and read it, I find something that I never even knew that was even there. It was a very difficult book to write because it was based upon Dante's Inferno, which is not an easy read. So in each process, in each chapter, I had referenced Dante's Inferno and incorporated that into modern day Manhattan at the time, during a pandemic of all things. So that was challenging.
We've gotten a lot of fascinating answers from authors we talk to about dialogue and how it comes out of their head and onto the page. For you, does that tend to come easily as you're writing?
I think that dialogue has to move the story forward. It can't be an information dump. It has to sound like the character. And so my first thing I do is, especially with major characters, or the hero and the villain, is to have somebody in mind. For instance, in The Loch, the hero's father, Angus, is this wily Scotsman who is an alcoholic and a womanizer, and pretty much a total scum. But you love him because he loves his family and he loves Scotland. That won't stop him to taking advantage of them, but so I had in mind when I was writing his character, Sean Connery, who just passed away yesterday. And he was my favorite actor, and I thought he would be perfect for the part. So his voice is talking to me when I write the character's dialogue. Zachary.
Yeah.
Money Penny.
I see the Sharkman poster hanging on the wall behind you there. Was that character an homage at all to a childhood love of comic books?
Well, I grew up reading comics, and I think Spider-Man was my favorite comic, probably. And so I love the kind of hero, the down and out hero who's got to overcome so many things. And I just thought that the kid who was the book is about, who had aspirations to become a professional basketball player, and ended up by his own fault getting into a car accident that killed his mother.
Oh.
And he left him paralyzed. And he comes across he actually was suicidal through the first half of the book. And then he comes across a particular option to work in this laboratory that is doing stem cell research that can heal his spine potentially, but also do some other things that he didn't account for. And so I thought it would make a good story. And I do like Sharkman. I think it's a really fun story. I'm not sure what Sharkman's going to be at this point, maybe a TV series, but it's a long ways down the road.
On a different page entirely, what first inspired you to write your comedy, Dog Training the American Male, under a pseudonym?
That came to me one day as my wife and I were in a fight, arguing about something stupid. And my dog, my first German Shepherd, Meg, walked by and she yelled at the dog. And the dog immediately knew what she was saying and went off to do what she wanted. And I sat there thinking, I can't communicate with my wife as a human being, but my dog understands what she's saying. So, and then I started realizing human are a lot like dogs. We prefer to lay on the couch and watch football. And if we could, we would, I don't want to get into that, but we observe our bowel movements before we flush. We take pride in those things. We pee on trees, we do Howl at the Moon. And so it just sort of seemed like a comedy that I wanted to write. And I didn't put it out under my name. I put it under as a pseudonym because it was so different from my other books, which was probably a mistake because it was the best reviewed book that I've ever written. Everyone who read it loved it, but not that many people read it.
Do you have a favorite among the Meg series or from your broader catalog?
I think it's like you say, it's like, asking you what your favorite child is. You're attached to all of them in different ways. They've all come during different times of my life. But I can't really say I have a favorite. but I do enjoy them. If I I used to go to do book signings, and I'd sit there and open the book to any random page and just start reading. And the fact that I was hooked into my own book was a good sign.
One of the beauties of reading is that kids can discover it through all different backdrops, and no doubt many first found their love through the Meg series. Tell us along those lines about the Adopt an Author program that you run. It's free, it's nationwide, and it's a secondary school reading program promoting new works by authors.
It's a secondary school reading program that gets teenagers to want to read because it makes reading fun. And what we do is it came about after I wrote Meg that I started getting inundated with emails from teenagers who were all saying the same thing. I hate to read, but I read Meg and I loved it. First book I ever finished. And then I found out that teachers were using the book in high school and junior high as part of their curriculum, which kind of took me by surprise. Written as not a kid's book or a teen's book. And then I found out that the Young Adult Library Services Association had named Meg the #1 book for their pick of the year. And I realized that something was happening that I needed to be part of. My background's in education. I have a bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degree in education. I'm certified to teach in secondary school. And so we created a nonprofit to support the teachers who wanted to use the book in school. We take on a couple other authors as well. And in addition to all those things, we also give them access to free curriculum materials, tests, quizzes, vocabulary lists. And in addition to that, they can contact me while they're reading the book. And then at the end of the unit, I am accessible to set up in-class conference calls for live Q&A. And of course, now we have Skype and Zoom.
It's really the lifeblood of any author's career to stay as involved with the readers as personally as possible. How important do you feel consistent engagement for the author is versus hiding behind a wall of publicists and agents and so forth?
Well, it's something I've always done. I always believe that if someone took the time and money to read one of my books and wrote me an email, they deserve a personal reply back. And I've always replied personally, and I send them newsletters. I respond to their own situations. They know they have my loyalty and I have theirs.
What kind of advice would you give aspiring authors that are maybe crafting their first series, especially since so many publishers look for that, and more generally on the craft and business of writing as long as you have and as successfully as you have?
My advice is don't try to write a trilogy. Just write one book as good as you can and leave the window open in case the door closes for a second book. But don't think about a trilogy. Don't think about making a sequel. Just make the first one as good as you can. If you go to my website, stevealten.com, ALTEN.com, there's you can click on writing tips. And there was a video that I made years ago that I basically sit on stage and discuss for about 45 minutes writing tips that I think would help you. The simple answer to that question is that I basically tell people if they want to write their own story, don't write about something that because you are familiar with it. Write about something that you enjoy reading and then do the research.
Along with interacting with your fans personally, you went as far as creating an online world tailored for them. Please tell viewers a bit about that.
It's a project that I've been working on since last December called Monster Cove. It's a website, seamonstercove.com. And it came about because in December of 2019, I had an idea for an all-new prehistoric shark and sea monster universe. And I had this great story, and I realized I don't want it to be a book. I want it to be a TV series. I want to be able to produce it and direct it. Not direct it, but write it without being bumped off like I was on some of the other books that turned into movies. And more than that, I wanted to be able to take a virtual vacation by going to this island and seeing these sea monsters in tanks, in futuristic tanks, as a visitor. And so that's what we've created. We've created this new type of entertainment that we can take the members there to these extraordinary tanks that have been built by 3D animators who are fans of mine, who are fans of the Make series. and who really wanted to launch this as much as I did. So we've created together these amazing facilities that we can do everything from put you in an aquarium, in an observation area, or put you down in a cage into their territory and let them basically go after you. And you control the angle that you're viewing from, and they seem to know that you're there and want you, not in a kind way. So in addition to that, we finished shooting the first episode of the TV series. We're developing a video game. There's an educational site there for distance learning. So there's a lot to the site, and because it came out during the pandemic, we basically discounted it about 70%. It's only like 30 cents a day for an entire household. So under the price of a movie ticket a month, you can get to enjoy all these things.
What can fans expect to see next on the silver screen? A Meg sequel?
Meg at this point is just the first movie. So the sequel is in development, and The Loch is going into production sometime in 2021. It's exciting. I battle my own demons. You probably notice I'm a little wiry. It's because I have Parkinson's, so it makes every day a little difficult. But having the movies to look forward to is a great thing too. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. I know a lot of authors don't get that, but it was a 22-year fight to get that made, and hopefully it won't be 22 years for the next one.
Before we go, what can your fans look forward to going into the bookstore and picking up next off the shelf?
I'm finishing up. I'm about 70% finished The Loch 3, which is Heaven's Lake, and I expect to get that done maybe in the next 3 to 5 months. I'm also working on scripts for the Where Sea Monsters Roam, which is the name of the TV series that will be attached to the website seamonstercove.com. So that if you're a member of seamonstercove.com, you get free access to everything, including the TV series.
Mr. Alten, it's been an absolute thrill speaking with you. I've enjoyed it, and I know the viewers have. We hope you have too. Thank you so much again for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.